12 ships, 3 oceans, $3 billion. Gone in 4 hours. You probably didn't hear about it. The news barely covered it. But what happened on that Tuesday morning didn't just change shipping. It changed the rules of power itself. And the terrifying part? Most people still don't understand what it means. I need to tell you something that's going to sound impossible. There's a reason your groceries cost more. A reason insurance companies are quietly panicking. A reason global supply chains are being redrawn in boardrooms across Europe right now. And it all traces back to a single coordinated operation that proved something the West desperately wanted to ignore. The ocean is no longer safe. Not from pirates, not from storms, from something far more calculated, something that's been building for 2 years while we weren't paying attention. And on that Tuesday, it finally happened. Russia didn't fire a single shot, didn't sink a single vessel, didn't kill anyone. What they did was worse. They proved that the entire system we built our modern world on, safe passage for commercial ships, neutral trade routes, international maritime law, was just a gentleman's agreement. And gentlemen's agreements only work until someone decides they don't. Let me take you back to 3 a.m. Moscow time. Most of Europe was asleep. American markets hadn't opened. Perfect timing. Russian naval units in 3 completely separate regions received identical orders. The Baltic Sea near Kaliningrad, the Black Sea off Crimea, the Arctic along the Northern Sea route, 3 different oceans, same mission, board every Western-flagged vessel in range, secure the cargo, escort them to Russian ports, no exceptions. The captains didn't resist. What could they do? Russian destroyers surrounded them. Armed personnel appeared on deck. Official documents declaring the vessels seized under reciprocal asset protection measures. That's what they called it, reciprocal, as if this was somehow fair, as if this was justice. By 7 a.m., 12 ships were in Russian custody, oil tankers loaded with Norwegian crude, container ships packed with German machinery, LNG carriers destined for British ports, $3 billion worth of vessels and cargo, just taken. And here's what should scare you. Russia didn't choose these ships randomly. They'd been tracking them for weeks, knew exactly what they carried, knew exactly when they'd be most valuable, knew exactly where NATO forces couldn't intervene without triggering something much, much worse. This was planned, meticulously, patiently. While Western leaders congratulated themselves on sanctions that were crippling Russia's economy, Russian naval intelligence was building target lists, studying insurance policies, mapping shipping routes, identifying maximum impact seizures. They waited until the perfect moment, when European energy demand was highest, when Western navies were stretched thin, when supply chains were already fragile, then they struck. Most people think this was retaliation, anger, desperation. That's exactly what they're supposed to think. But retaliation is emotional. This was surgical. Russia didn't grab ships because they were mad about sanctions. They grabbed ships to prove a point that changes everything about global power. You want to freeze our assets? Fine, we'll freeze yours. You want to seize our oligarchs' yachts? Watch what happens when we seize commercial vessels worth actual economic value. You want to weaponize trade? Welcome to the game, except we control the board. The Baltic seizures happened just outside NATO territorial waters, close enough to be provocative, far enough to avoid triggering Article 5. Russia chose that location with GPS precision. They knew exactly where the line was, and they knew NATO wouldn't cross it, not for cargo ships, not when crossing it means naval confrontation with a nuclear power. The Black Sea seizures were even bolder. Those ships were heading to Ukrainian ports through waters Russia considers theirs. International law says otherwise, but international law requires enforcement, and who's going to enforce it against Russia in the Black Sea? Their naval dominance there is absolute. Western vessels entering those waters are at Russian mercy. Everyone knows it. We just pretended we didn't. But the Arctic seizures? That's where this gets truly frightening. The Northern Sea route is the fastest shipping lane between Europe and Asia. Cuts weeks off traditional routes, saves millions in fuel costs. Russia controls it, all of it. Their nuclear icebreakers, their Arctic military bases, their territorial claims that Western nations dispute but can't challenge. And now, they've proven they'll use that control as an economic weapon. Insurance companies understood immediately. Lloyd's of London suspended coverage for Russian-controlled waters within hours. Maritime premiums tripled overnight. Shipping companies started rerouting around entire regions, adding weeks to journeys, millions to costs, because suddenly the risk calculation changed. It's not about piracy anymore, it's about state-sponsored seizure with zero recourse. You know what the genius part is? Russia used our own legal precedents against us. When Western nations froze $300 billion in Russian central bank reserves, we established that economic warfare justifies asset seizure. When we banned Russian ships from European ports, we proved that maritime access is conditional. When we confiscated oligarch yachts, we created the legal framework for targeting vessels based on ownership. Russia just applied those exact same principles, used our own playbook, turned our weapons around, and fired them back at us. And we have no moral authority to object, none, because every single justification Russia used came from actions we took first. We normalized this. We made commercial shipping a battlefield. They just proved they're better at fighting there than we are. Think about what this means. Really think about it. Commercial vessels have operated under protected status for centuries. Even during wars, merchant ships enjoyed safe passage unless carrying military cargo. That protection is dead now, killed by Western sanctions that Russia just weaponized into something far more dangerous. Every cargo ship is now a potential hostage. Every trade route is contested territory. Every delivery is at the mercy of whoever controls the waters. Global shipping costs are never going back to normal. Insurance will never cover Russian-controlled routes the same way. Supply chains are being permanently restructured around avoiding these regions. This isn't temporary disruption. This is the new reality, and it's only just beginning. Because Russia didn't just change maritime law. They gave every sanctioned nation on Earth a template. China controls the South China Sea. They could implement identical seizure policies tomorrow. Block Western access to $5 trillion in annual trade. Iran holds the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of global oil flows through there. They could mirror Russian tactics and double energy prices overnight. Venezuela, North Korea, every country that's faced Western economic coercion is watching this playbook work in real time. Russia just showed them how to fight back. The strategic brilliance is almost beautiful if it wasn't so terrifying. Western sanctions were supposed to isolate Russia, force them into submission through economic pressure. Instead, they created a world where economic warfare is normalized, where maritime law is optional, where commercial shipping is a weapon anyone can use. Russia's response proves that sanctions are a double-edged sword, and they just demonstrated they can cut deeper with it than we ever could. Here's the part that keeps intelligence analysts awake at night. This escalates. It has to, because every seized vessel creates a diplomatic crisis. Every insurance claim becomes a legal battlefield. Every rerouted ship proves Russian maritime dominance. Western governments now face an impossible choice: accept Russian control over critical shipping routes, or escalate militarily to protect commercial vessels. Naval escorts for merchant ships means military vessels in Russian waters. Military vessels in contested zones means potential for confrontation between nuclear powers. And confrontation between nuclear powers means we're one miscalculation away from something that makes cargo seizures look trivial. This is how wars start, not with declarations, not with grand strategies, with escalating incidents that spiral beyond anyone's control. The Cuban Missile Crisis began with Soviet ships carrying missiles. This crisis involves Russian control over routes that carry 40% of Europe's energy. The stakes are actually higher, because energy supplies are survival. Missile deployments were just leverage. Russia's timing reveals how deeply they understand Western vulnerabilities. They waited for winter, peak European energy demand, limited alternative supply routes. They waited until Western navies were stretched across Ukraine, the Indo-Pacific, Middle East conflicts. They waited until Western economies were already struggling with inflation and supply chain chaos. Maximum impact, minimal risk of effective retaliation. This is how you fight a superpower when direct confrontation isn't feasible. You target their dependencies, you exploit their assumptions, you strike when they can't respond without losing more than they'd gain. Russian military planners studied American operations in Iraq, Libya, Syria. They learned. turn the enemy's strengths into weaknesses, use their own rules against them, create situations that can't be reversed. $3 billion is nothing compared to what comes next. This was just the opening move. Western shipping companies now face a choice: negotiate with Russia for safe passage, or accept permanent exclusion from the most efficient routes between Europe and Asia. The Northern Sea route is the fastest connection between European and Asian markets. The Black Sea links Europe to Middle Eastern energy. The Baltic connects Scandinavia to global trade. Russia controls all three, and they just proved they'll weaponize that control. This is tribute, medieval-style economic dominance, backed by nuclear weapons and hypersonic missiles that can sink any Western naval force attempting intervention. Pay for protection or face seizure. The same system empires used to control trade for thousands of years. Except now it's enforced by technology that makes resistance suicidal. China is watching. They control shipping routes worth trillions through contested waters. They could apply this template tomorrow. Iran controls Hormuz. They could do the same. Every sanctioned nation is learning the same lesson. Commercial warfare beats military confrontation when you control strategic choke points. Russia just gave them the playbook, and the West has no counter-strategy, because military protection requires confrontation with nuclear powers. Economic retaliation requires controlling strategic resources we don't possess. Diplomatic resolution requires admitting that sanctions warfare failed and Russian maritime dominance succeeded. None of these options are politically acceptable to Western leaders who spent 2 years claiming sanctions would bring Russia to its knees. We're trapped in an escalation spiral where every response makes things worse. The intelligence community saw this coming. Analysts warned about maritime vulnerability when sanctions began. They were ignored. Policymakers believed Russian retaliation would be limited and ineffective. They were catastrophically wrong. Russia's maritime strategy doesn't just threaten Western shipping, it threatens the entire Western alliance, because European nations depend on maritime trade for survival. When Russian actions start choking European industries of raw materials and energy, alliance unity will crumble. Germany's chemical sector depends on imports now facing seizure risk. British food supplies rely on routes Russia can block. French nuclear plants need uranium transiting Russian-controlled waters. European leaders will face a choice: maintain alliance with America that makes their economies hostage to Russian maritime power, or negotiate separate arrangements that guarantee survival. The irony is crushing. Western sanctions were designed to isolate Russia and preserve Western unity. Instead, they're isolating Western nations from critical resources and fracturing the alliance over how to respond to Russian retaliation. Russia is achieving strategic objectives through maritime control that they never could have through military invasion alone. This is asymmetric warfare at its most sophisticated. Russia doesn't need to match Western naval power. They just need to control strategic choke points and use Western legal precedents to justify their actions. $3 billion in seized vessels just changed the rules of international commerce permanently. Commercial shipping is now a legitimate target for economic warfare. Maritime routes are weapons. The age of neutral trade is dead, killed by the very sanctions that were supposed to preserve Western economic dominance. 12 ships, 3 oceans, 4 hours. And the world changed. Most people still don't know, but they will when the costs hit, when the shortages begin, when they realize the ocean stopped being neutral and nobody told them. Russia didn't just seize cargo, they seized the future, and they're only getting started. The question isn't whether this escalates. That's guaranteed. The question is whether anyone recognizes what's happening before maritime warfare destroys the global economy everyone's trying to protect. Because once commercial shipping becomes a battlefield, everyone loses, except the powers that control the choke points. And Russia just proved they control more than anyone realized. The game has changed. The ocean isn't safe anymore. And that Tuesday morning was just the beginning of something much, much worse.